Rule 7, build commitment to the process. Joe talked about the importance of ground rules and having the talk at the beginning of a meeting. And that's certainly useful when you're dealing with a team that meets irregularly, so they're not in a habit of having certain practices in place, and teams that might have some question about whether they're going to behave well. In practice, however, when you are looking at meetings as a business leader at scale, stopping to have the talk before every meeting is kind of inefficient. So what we have seen happen with higher performing organizations and that we teach in our own programs is to establish performance criteria for your meetings that apply across the board. And I think it's useful to think about these performance criteria as sort of organization-size ground rules that establish the rules of the game as it is played in your organization. So you'll be doing things that help people understand what kind of behavior in your meetings is out of bounds and what are the different roles that somebody might play. Do you have facilitators and timekeepers or note takers or things like that? And in all kinds of ways, just sort of establishing some guidelines that apply to meetings across the board. And to help make this a little bit more tangible, let me give you some examples from famous companies. So Amazon is particularly famous for a couple of their ground rules. They have the no PowerPoint rule, which is their way of saying that people will not be spending time in their meetings reading at each other. And instead, they have a practice which is called the briefing, and they spend the first several minutes of their meetings reading the content for their meeting in silence. The other rule that Amazon uses is the two pizza rule. And that's their way of saying that there shouldn't be any more people in the meeting than can be fed by 2 large pizzas. Now, I'm guessing, based on what we've seen with the brainstorming sciences, that sometimes they, have some bigger meetings. But in general, these criteria apply to most meetings they have at their business level. Another famous example, Apple. At the end of every meeting, Apple employees go through the list of tasks and action items that were created during that meeting, and they identify their DRIs, or directly responsible individuals. And that's their way of making sure that they can hold themselves and each other accountable for following through on the decisions they've made in the meeting. Finally, another example, Brené Brown, who is the author of Dare to Lead and does great work for championing leaders' need to get in touch with their vulnerability as a sign of strength and a sign of unlocking, the fear that holds us back, has developed a number of meeting practices in her company that strengthen and reinforce that value. For example, one of the things they do before they come to a rumble, which is their meeting where they're going to, sit down and really go at the issue in an honest and straightforward way, is they write themselves permission slips. And when they write themselves permission slips, they're giving themselves permission to do something that they need to do to make sure they can stay in full integrity, honesty, and openness in that meeting. So for example, they may write, I give myself permission to ask for a break if I need it. Whatever it is that they need to explicitly remind themselves about and make sure they have permission to do in the meeting, they write down ahead of time. So these are 3 examples from 3 well-known companies about ways in which they have built criteria or ground rules setting their behavior in meetings at a company level. And when you do that, it's much, much easier to build commitment into the process because the ground rules are baked into your company's fundamental way of working.